Welcome everyone to my Misfortune Runes guide for Season 8. Misfortune is probably the most flexible ADC in the entire game and therefore can effectively use a variety of rune setups. As a matter of fact, however, some of those runes are rather situational on Misfortune or outright outclassed by other options. In the following I will show you all the options Misfortune has and how strong they are compared to each other, so you can make all the right decisions in your pre-game lobby. However, since you most certainly know that the internet is full of misleading information and that people tend to talk a lot of BS, you should definitely ask yourself, why would I listen to what that guy is telling me? And this is a very important question that I for sure need to answer. I might not be a challenger player myself, but I have played more than 700 ranked games with Misfortune over the last 1.5 years and managed to climb all the way up to Diamond, spamming MF whenever possible. Moreover, I stalk the best Misfortune players of every single server on a regular basis, links in the description by the way, in order to see what they are doing and what's working for them. So you can be sure that I know what I'm talking about rather well, and that this video will help you improving your own rank. Now that we got this out of the way, let's talk about the runes, or more importantly the keystones. I will go from the worst keystone to the best and explain the builds that go along with them. If you just want to see the finished runes tier list at the end or skip to a specific keystone, you can find timestamps in the description. Every keystone that is not included in this video is both useless and unpopular on Misfortune, and therefore does not require an explanation from my part. Another quick disclaimer, this list is of course not completely objective, but heavily influenced by my experiences, playstyle and preferences. Okay, so let's start with Conqueror. If I had merely looked at viability, this keystone wouldn't even be in this video. That's just how bad it is on MF. However, some high elo Misfortunes have experimented with this, and Fi made a video about it which boosted Conqueror's popularity, so let me explain. Of course I understand where these people are coming from, and the Conqueror Dream looks pretty awesome at first sight. It gives you raw AD which feeds into your ultimate, helps you shred through tanks with true damage, and lasts for a whole 3 seconds, which perfectly fits your ultimate's 3 seconds duration. These stats are very nice and would be absolutely OP on Misfortune if proccing this rune was as easy as, for example, proccing Arcane Comet. However, the only way to obtain these absurd power boosts is to stay in combat for 4 seconds before attacking an enemy champion. To stay in combat you can either attack enemy champions, enemy minions, enemy structures or jungle monsters. In lane this keystone will definitely deal less damage than Aery or Comet, and you'd be a fool to question that. The idea behind Conqueror is to obliterate the enemy with your ult in a team fight. Hence the question that remains is, can you reliably stay in combat before a team fight breaks out? The worst ideas ever would be to blatantly attack an enemy turret or an enemy frontliner while both teams are staring each other down. You have to remember, all their crowd control abilities and sometimes even their flashes are still up. If you stay in auto range before anyone has initiated the fight, you are basically begging to get jumped on by a Maokai or an Ornn. You're the AD carry. If you join a team fight before the frontline's CC is on cooldown, they will use it on you and you will die. So what's left? Attacking minions sounds like a good solution. However, that only works when minions are actually nearby, and even then everyone on your team greets for CS and the wave is cleared in probably less than 2 seconds. The only scenario in which Conqueror might work is when attacking jungle monsters, or more specifically Baron or Dragon. When your team is attacking one of those objectives, you either end up taking it or the enemy ends up challenging it. Getting a Baron or Drake for free is of course a plus, but if the enemy wants to fight you over it, your Conqueror will be all stacked up and ready to go immediately. Therefore, this would be a win-win situation for you. Keep in mind though that in every other case, Conqueror will end up not dealing a single extra point of damage. If you manage to get a good Conqueror ult off, you probably win the team fight, sure, but if that's only happening 1 out of 10 times, then this keystone will have an overall losing impact on your games. Design-wise, Conqueror is a proactive rune. Its conditions are easily met by champions who can be proactive in a teamfight, who can initiate a teamfight. AD carries in general need to be reactive. If you play Misfortune like a frontliner, you will more often than not pay for this with your life. Just in case you still want to see Conqueror Misfortune in action, just click the link in the description. Press the Attack is the worst viable keystone on this list. You can take it in tank matchups if no one else on your team took it. The debuff on them will help your team to take them down. However, proccing press the attack in the lane phase is deceptively hard and only really happens in proper fights and not while simply trading with them, which really makes it weaker compared to other options. It's basically anti-synergy with your kit, since MF is designed to bully in lane. Moreover, Misfortune is supposed to be a hit and run champion, or to switch between targets with her love tap. Press the attack, on the other hand, is designed for extended duels. You can choose press the attack in some matchups though, despite its complete lack of synergy. Let's say you're up against a Jhin, whom you shouldn't fight in lane anyway, and the rest of the enemy team is really tanky. Fleet Footwork would probably still outclass press the attack in this situation, but let's look at an example build. In the second row of the precision path, you should either take Triumph for the extra healing, or Presence of Mind for better uptime on your ultimate. In the third row, you can go total ham with Legend Alacrity, or decide to play it safe with Legend Bloodline. An interesting alternative would be Overheal plus Bloodline with a Death Stance build. Since you should be playing against multiple tanks anyway with Press the Attack, your best option in the fourth row is the rune Cutdown. The consistent damage buff against tanks is quite significant. I've had plenty of games in which this rune dealt almost as much damage as my keystone over the course of the game. Your secondary path should be Sorcery with a standard Celerity and Gathering Storm. Some people like to pick Absolute Focus over Celerity. I personally value in-combat movement speed very highly, but this is basically a matter of preference. For an example game of Press the Attack Misfortune, feel free to click the link in the description. Glacial Augment is probably one of the more fun runes on MF. She cannot really use the active item slow, but her kiting potential with her autos in combination with W movement speed is insane. Once you've maxed your E, the 60% slow will actually overshadow your keystone, but that doesn't happen until level 18 since you should max W first for maximum kiting and Q second because Q scales quite well with skill points. This is a build that puts most of its power into auto attacks, so you should buy standard ADC crit items to go with it. This keystone puts you on the inspiration path, and even though the minor runes in more offensive trees might be better, MF still has viable options here. In the second row, most people pick the free boots or the stopwatch. You can make this decision depending on the matchup. If there is a Z on the enemy team, for example, stopwatch will be quite strong. In most cases though, I personally prefer the boots, since the extra move speed further increases your kiting and chasing potential. And one quick reminder while we are at it, unlike what most people think, the stopwatch rune does not save you 600 gold when you build your Guardian Angel. That would be super OP by the way. No, it only saves you 300 gold, just like the magical footwear, which is specifically stated in the rune's tooltip. For very tough lanes, you can choose the Biscuits in the third row. The extra mana is nice too, but meaningless once you have your Essence Reaver. Therefore, I would go with Futures Market in most games to help you acquire those expensive crit items a little bit sooner. The Approach Velocity rune, which has recently got buffed by the way, is your preferred fourth row choice when you run Glacial Augment due to obvious synergy. When deciding which secondary path to pick, you should keep the stat bonuses in mind. Picking Precision would give you a lot of attack speed, but maxing W and buying a rapid fire cannon later will give you more than enough of this. Remember, this build is about kiting, so the much loved Celerity plus Gathering Storm looks especially good here, for it gives you more movement speed. I don't think I need to mention here that AD is the single best stat for MF anyway, but the sorcery path provides exactly that. If you want to see Kite Monster MF in action, click the link in the description. The next rune I present to you is Kleptomancy. It's just as much fun as Glacial Augment, but notably stronger in my opinion. You can easily proc it in lane, for all you need to do is press W and run up to them, and once you have your rapid fire cannon, you should proc it outside of lane somewhat reliably too. Additionally, you will always get a proc on your first Q hit, but keep in mind that your proc gets consumed and nullified by minions, which means that you won't trigger this keystone when your Q bounces off of a minion onto a champion. Since this rune makes you insanely rich and synergizes very well with rapid fire cannon, you should buy all these juicy crit items, so this is the preferred build. More movement speed means easier Klepto procs, and additional attack speed further buffs your crit enhanced auto attacks. Therefore I like W max a lot with this build. Qmax however does also work, so this comes down to personal preference. As for the other runes in the inspiration path, there's not much to change from the Glacial Augment page. You still go with magical footwear, or sometimes with stopwatch instead, and can choose between biscuits or futures market. However, approach velocity doesn't look too appealing without the slow from Glacial Augment, so you should go with Cosmic Insight. If you're a huge fan of Time Warp Tonic, you can also go ahead and pick that in the 4th row, since it synergizes with Klepto and biscuits. As I have mentioned earlier, more movement speed equals easier Klepto procs, so you simply cannot go wrong with Celerity plus Gathering Storm again. For some exciting Klepto MF gameplay, just have a look at the description. Not only does Electrocute have a surprising amount of burst damage in lane, but it also has the highest bonus AD scaling of all keystones. Additionally, MF has several ways to trigger it. In lane, she can auto-Q auto or E-auto-Q. In teamfights, EQR is optimal, but auto-QR works as well. As long as you get your R off as a 3rd combo piece, you should be good to go. The two major drawbacks of this rune are firstly that it does not help your poke damage in lane at all, and secondly its comparably long cooldown. Even at level 18, which you probably won't even reach in 95% of your games, it is still a whopping 25 seconds, which means you will only be able to proc it once per teamfight. However, the high burst damage and good scaling with AD and lethality plays nicely towards Miss Fortune's strength as an early to mid-game bully. Therefore, running the iconic lethality build on MF is a very good idea in this case. On the domination path, the choices of your minor runes are rather clear in my opinion. Taste of Blood in the 2nd row provides you some healing that even scales with bonus AD. However, it mostly helps you to stay in lane for longer, since its internal cooldown makes it very unreliable late game. The other two choices in this row are even worse in my opinion. MF cannot proc sudden impact at all if you don't want to flash for it, and Cheap Shot merely provides poorly scaling bonus damage that MF can only proc by herself with her E, and that costs way too much mana. Unless you have a lot of CC on your team, Taste of Blood is the way to go. In the 3rd row, you definitely want to pick Eyeball Collection, since 18 extra AD is way more important for you than the vision gimmicks. Additionally, Duskblade helps you to stack your Eyeball Collection reliably with its Ward Revealing passive. The 4th row is also crystal clear, but nonetheless needs some talking. Many people see Ravenous Hunter and immediately think this rune is OP on Miss Fortune, since she is basically an AD caster. Oh, I wish they were correct. Unfortunately though, the rune doesn't interact with MF's kit the way you would think. Her Q, despite being an ability, does not proc Ravenous Hunter for some reason, and neither does her Love Tap. So what's left? Your ulti, which is nice, but remember the healing is cut down to 1/3 for AoE. Yes, your E applies it as well, but the damage is basically non-existent. MF doesn't build big active items such as Locket, Redemption or Zhonya's, so Ingenious Hunter is not really worth it. All this leaves us with is Relentless Hunter, and sure, why not? Out of combat movement speed helps with rotations and Duskblade procs. When in the domination path, picking Precision, Sorcery or Inspiration as secondary paths is equally viable. You should keep the enemy team in mind when making that decision. Do they have big tanks such as Cho'Gath or Zac? Then choose Precision so you get access to Cutdown. Do they have a Rengar or Zed who will just try to blow you up repeatedly? Choose Inspiration to get an early stopwatch and work towards your GA. But when in doubt, Celerity plus Gathering Storm is king. Well, if you feel really naughty, you could even go Absolute Focus and Scorch, which gives you the most power possible earliest into the game, but lets you fall off pretty hard if the game isn't decided past 20 minutes. You want to see an MF Electrocute game? You find one in the description. Now we only have the runes left that the high elo Miss Fortune players are using. These should overall give you the best chances of winning your games, so let's jump right into it, shall we? Fleet Footwork is essentially a better version of Glacial Augment. Instead of slowing them down, it's speeding you up, so the kiting is still amazing. However, Fleet Footwork is a rune that actively scales with critical hits, which gives it even better synergy. You can again max Q or W. I prefer W max with crit builds, but it's really up to you. As far as itemization is concerned, you can either go straight into crit or buy a Ghostblade first item if the enemy team is really squishy. All three options in the second row are viable for Misfortune. Overheal synergizes with your Keystone, Triumph gives you the edge in close fights, and Presence of Mind allows you to ult more often. I'd go with Presence of Mind, but other choices are also completely fine. The third row is quite flexible too, since Legend Alacrity and Legend Bloodline both have their benefits. You already have a form of sustain through your Keystone, so the lifesteal is not as needed, but especially in combination with Overheal, Bloodline is very useful. I, however, chose Alacrity in this example since I like Presence of Mind and think the healing from Footwork is enough in most cases. The fourth row follows a fairly simple rule of thumb. If they have at least 2 tanks, pick Cutdown. If not, pick Coup de Grace. Sometimes, however, Cutdown is the preferred option, even though there is only one single tank on the enemy team, namely if it is a tank that stacks a lot of health, for example Cho'Gath or Zac. Since MF definitely wants some AD from her runes, there is only one real option considering the secondary path. You've probably guessed it, Celerity plus Gathering Storm. If you want to go a little bit more ham, you can swap out Celerity for Absolute Focus. For some fleet footwork action, all you need to do is go to the video description. The following 3 keystones are all excellent choices for MF, and I wouldn't put them in a specific order, since they all fulfill different purposes, but well, I have to start somewhere, so here we go. Summon Aery is the first of those keystones I consider top tier on Misfortune. It is strongest very early into the game, especially before level 6. Aery applies on literally everything you do to your opponent, and unlike Arcane Comet, it cannot miss. You can think of it as an extra love tap, since it synergizes perfectly with hit and run strategies. Unfortunately though, the rune doesn't come without its drawbacks. Once you reach later stages of the game, its damage falls off really hard. What you have to consider here, however, is that every single game you play has an early game phase, while late game is only reached in a few of them. So you should use Aery's early power to lock down the opponent before late game even comes. Luckily, this is exactly what Misfortune excels in. Due to that, Aery Misfortune should be played with a lethality build to maximize your early game pressure. In the second row of the sorcery path, I would pick Mana Flow Band. Your build will provide a lot of cooldown reduction anyway, so Ultimate Hat is not as important as actually having the mana to cast your devastating ulti. Nullifying Orb can also be very strong in some matchups, but most of the time Mana Flow Band will be strictly better. The third row has the 2 compelling options of Celerity and Absolute Focus. I personally think that in-combat movement speed is an extremely overpowered stat, since it helps you chasing, kiting, escaping, and finding good positions for your ultimate. But if you want to have even more raw power, you can also go with the latter. At this point, I also want to briefly talk about Transcendence. I have been super excited when this rune first got announced, but it is a very nasty trap for duo laners. You have to keep in mind that it does absolutely nothing until you reach level 10, which usually happens slightly before the 20-minute mark. Can you afford to run a rune that literally doesn't help you at all for the first 20 minutes? Definitely not, especially not with this build. In the fourth row, you choose between Scorch and Gathering Storm, since Water Walking is only for junglers really. Considering the overall theme of this build, Scorch seems like the better choice, even though I personally like Gathering Storm on AD carries a lot. But yeah, Scorch it is, the early game power is too important here. The secondary path is completely up to you, as long as you choose Precision, Domination or Inspiration. It again depends on your opponent's team, but a generally safe bet would be Presence of Mind or Triumph, and Coup de Grace. I also have a Summon Aery MF game for you. All you need to do is click on it. While Aery is early game domination, Dark Harvest is the complete opposite. In lane, triggering this rune can be quite situational. You either need a cannon wave or some dead bodies during a fight for it to work here. Nonetheless, you should always be looking for auto attacks or Q bounces whenever a cannon minion drops one of these juicy souls. Once laning phase is over though, this keystone can really start to shine. Remember, souls will drop whenever any champion dies, doesn't matter if it's friend or foe, so the more bloody the team fight the better, right? Additionally, this rune scales infinitely into the game, so you won't need to worry about falling off at all. Moreover, this is the only rune that works on towers, which strongly enhances your pushing power. Since Dark Harvest deals adaptive damage, it scales super hard with lethality. In case you didn't know, lethality works on towers as well, which means you'll be taking massive chunks of HP out of them. But there are a lot of viable builds for this rune. You could even go with more tanky items such as Morph Mormortius, Guardian Angel and the Black Cleaver, and solely rely on your scaling. I personally really enjoy rushing a Death's Dance with this rune, since the bleed passive allows you to survive longer and get your soul resets in teamfights. Not only that, but the Dark Harvest proc even heals you now. As for the minor runes, not much changes compared to the Electrocute page, so Taste of Blood, Eyeball Collection and Relentless Hunter. You again can and should choose your secondary path depending on the enemy team comp. I personally go with Celerity and Gathering Storm most of the time for even harder late game scaling, but Triumph and Coup de Grace would be really strong and synergetic too, since they help you to get resets in teamfights. As for now, my whole channel basically consists of Dark Harvest MF gameplay, but I'll link an example video here anyway. Feel free to click on it. Alright, Arcane Comet, the last one of the big three. It is almost like a compromise between Dark Harvest and Summon Aery. A little bit less reliable than Aery and longer cooldown early, but still a strong poking tool in lane. And while having a comparably high AD scaling, it of course does not hit as hard late game as Dark Harvest potentially does. The Comet does not proc off of auto attacks, but MF is also an AD caster. This is not too much of a problem. Compared to Dark Harvest, this fact allows you to stay even safer in fights and still get your damage off. All you really need to do is E and R the enemy team from afar once your teammates have dropped their crowd control on them. In order to make full use of Comet's power in lane, I like to max my E ability by level 9. At max rank, Make It Rain applies a monstrous 60% slow on all enemies hit. This guarantees a Comet hit against any opponent without a dash and conveniently makes landing your ultimate that much easier. Make It Rain, however, is not the most affordable ability since the cost is a whopping 80 mana at all ranks. Therefore, Mana Flow Band is a must-have when you run Comet. The third row is a true choice between Celerity and Absolute Focus, so nothing has changed here compared to the Aery page. As I've said, I personally prefer Celerity, even though Absolute Focus works quite nicely with Comet's strong AD scaling. Speaking of which, Gathering Storm in the fourth row now suddenly looks a lot more attractive, and I'd pick it any day over Scorch when running Comet, so I can make the best use of the scaling. Scorch on the other hand further amplifies your strong poke damage in lane, and therefore still is a strong alternative. Your secondary path is nonetheless flexible, but I'd take the opportunity to delve deeply into Make It Rain's harassing power and Comet scaling, so I take Cheap Shot and Eyeball Collection. Just a quick annotation, even though Cheap Shot explicitly states that you need to hit them after the impairment, the rune still triggers off of Make It Rain on its own. This is the case because the damage is applied over time, so the second tick of damage occurs after the slow has been applied. Cheap Shot even tends to deal more damage than Scorch over the course of a game due to this great synergy. And last but not least, the video description also has an Arcane Comet gameplay video. So there you have it, a complete guide to Misfortune's rune choices. To sum it up, pick Comet, Dark Harvest or Aery when you're tryharding and eager to win. If you just want to have some fun on the other hand, feel free to experiment a little with some of the aforementioned setups. If this guide is helpful to you, you can let me know by leaving a like. Also, what are your favorite keystones on Misfortune? Shoot me a comment. I'm looking forward to some interesting discussions and hope to see you in my next video too. Bye!